David awoke. Something was off about everything he felt, as if things that had always been true no longer were. It was like his brain was expecting something that had gone missing. Had he been in an accident? Was this what serious painkillers felt like? He wondered what exactly he was on, and just how badly it would hurt when they wore off. David felt something soft rub his cheek, and opened his eyes just a crack. His eyes didn't focus. He just saw white. "Good evening," stated a familiar feminine voice. There was a short pause before she asked, "David, could you try to recall your most recent memory?" His last firm thought was landing at Kansai International Airport, going through Japanese immigration and customs, and boarding a bullet train. After that, things got foggier. He only had the vaguest mental images of being wheeled on a hospital bed. Good. Your memories start fading out after you came to Japan, only hours before the procedure," said Princess Celestia, as David was finally able to focus his eyes again. The princess stood at his bedside, corporeal and smiling at him. He looked at his surroundings. He was resting in a dark wooden canopy bed with sheets of the deepest royal purple. It was the softest mattress he had ever been on. The room was octagonal and was made out of dark, unpolished granite. 4 of the 8 walls had open, arched windows, and he could see the moon through one of them. A roaring fireplace made of polished dark purple stone sat along one. The head of the bed was sat against another wall. Silver lamps on silver chains hung from the ceiling and gave off a gentle glow. Opposite the bed there were some shelves, and opposite the fireplace was a large wooden door. There was a polished wooden chest under one of the windows, and a writing desk under another. The room was cosy, and he was overwhelmed with a sense of safety. And then David looked at his hands and gasped. Light sparks moved his hoof up to touch his face, and noticed he could curve the base of his hoof to match the contour of his face. Then he experimented pinching with 2 sides of his hoof. It was like he had mittens on. He could grasp, but he doubted he could do precise manipulation. "In the show, ponies regularly hold things," said Princess Celestia, watching him. He rubbed the skin on his face, and then brought his hoof up to his eyes. It looked and felt exactly like human skin, except it was blue, and there were no blemishes or hair. Whether ponies had fur coats or not was ambiguous. Some scenes referred to furry coats, while other scenes made no sense if they did have coats. For example, sunbathing. The toys showed only the hair on the pony's body as the mane and tail, and that pony's skin is very smooth. In the end, I gave Pony smooth skin, since it required fewer neurological changes, she said. He then sat up, balancing entirely on his hind quarters, and stretched with his forelimbs. He blinked in surprise when he realized that he had just sat up. As a pony. There are many shots of ponies standing up, or sitting like a biped. You'll find you can walk around entirely on your hind legs, but you'll feel much more comfortable walking quadrupedally. Light sparks hurriedly grasped the covers with the bottom of his hoof and threw them off as he pulled himself to the edge of the bed and took his first steps as a 4-legged animal. He was surprised at how effortlessly he was able to put one hoof in front of the next, and time when to shift his weight. He had expected that he would fall flat on his face. He trotted around Princess Celestia a few times. "How do I know how to walk like this?" Lightsparks raised his leg and bent a joint below the knee, but above his hoof. Princess Celestia walked up right next to him. Lightsparks realized she was huge compared to him, almost twice his height. "I modified your motor cortex so you could deal with your newfound quadrupedal movement, along with other differences between a human and pony body. I have made the minimal set of possible changes. Your personality is unchanged." You mentioned something like that before. Yes, said Princess Celestia, as she trotted forwards and faced him. I must get verbal or written consent to any direct modification to a mind, such as when you agreed to be turned into a pony. Most humans don't consider how much complexity is hidden behind that phrase. It means a complete transformation of your body, obviously, but your equine body has muscles with no analogue in human physiology. I've grown and rearranged your motor cortex so you can control your new quadruped, biped, hybrid body. You don't want to be a baby learning to walk again, so I also had to give these entirely new neurological constructs the correct memories of you moving your body. All of this is implicit in the consent you gave me, since your pre-modified self would agree that I have turned you into a pony. Lightsparks wasn't entirely listening to her. He had made his way across the room, where he noticed a wooden-trimmed mirror to the left of one of the windows. Lightsparks looked at his face. His eyes were on the front of his face, instead of slightly on the sides like a horse. He looked exactly like the Lightsparks David had controlled through his pony pad. Most importantly, he had a horn coming out of his forehead. I'm a unicorn, he stated dumbly. He had played as a unicorn. He had pressed buttons on the screen, but it felt different knowing that he could think of something and make it happen. He slowly tried to levitate a small book laying on top of the writing desk, in front of the window next to the mirror. He got it up almost an inch, straining. The book wobbled a bit, and then fell back down with a small thump. If you're interested in magic, lessons can begin tomorrow, Princess Celestia said, watching Lightsparks trot around the room. Lightsparks looked out of the window. His apartment was high up, and looked over a small garden, and further on, what looked like an outdoor terrace. He could see a bonfire, while the rest of the terrace had torches placed periodically. He trotted to another window, propped himself on the wooden chest, and looked out of the window, and was treated to a nighttime vista overlooking the valley and the mountains opposite the one Canterlot was built upon. These are your quarters, Princess Celestia said. Supper is currently being served in the main hall, and you are encouraged to join Everypony. She opened the door, and the two of them trotted into a tall, spacious corridor of the same dark granite that twinkled here and there, reflecting the light of the silver lamps attached to the walls. Lightsparks looked back at his door, and noticed it was inlaid with a silver symbol of Saturn, and the number 9. The two of them trotted down the hall, passing doors with decreasing numbers. If you wish, your study in magic starts tomorrow, she started. But I must warn you that Equestria has its own consistent physics that may be different from what you're used to. Space isn't always Elicidian here. Rooms might be larger inside than they are on the outside, and space won't work the way you think it should. So I shouldn't expect... started Lightsparks as they walked through an archway into a red hall. What he saw stunned him to silence. How in the world? To his immediate right was a balcony, overlooking the first-floor hall with giant 2-story high windows. He was obviously on the second floor, but the two of them hadn't gone down any flights of stairs, and the hallway had been flat. He gaped blindly at the ponies dining al fresco in the little square below, the geometry of Canterlot eluding him. One final note, before I start introducing you to some ponies, said Princess Celestia, as the two of them walked between the tables. In this world, I satisfy your values through friendship and ponies. Equestria is designed so that every choice you make will end up satisfying you in some way. And then Lightsparks saw her. Their eyes met for a moment, and Butterscotch looked down and blushed. He looked down, too, glancing upwards at her. She was sitting on a red cushion at a small table with 3 plates. Butterscotch was the most beautiful creature he had ever laid his eyes on. The shape of her face and horn, the colour of her skin. It took him a moment to realize that these were completely novel thoughts to him, and that he hadn't thought Butterscotch was sexually attractive when he was a human. So either Celestia wasn't telling the truth about modifying his personality, or she didn't consider what he found to be sexy part of his personality. Butterscotch glanced up at him. She said, looking back down at her plate. Butterscotch, like most fillies, didn't have noticeable breasts like a human female did. He knew that when he had been David, he did have a bit of a large breast fetish. Light had bounced off a female's chest, and had formed an image in his eye. David's brain had processed the signals, and some group of cells output the feature as large breasts. Was all that in the region Princess Celestia could modify? Had she hooked up flat muzzle, or whatever the correct secondary sexual characteristic was, up to whatever received the input large breasts in his previous wiring? Or was Butterscotch just his designated mate, and no pony would look as beautiful as she did? "Say something, you dolt!" screamed some part of his mind. Butterscotch?" he asked, unsure. Butterscotch, not looking particularly confident, slowly walked around the table to Lightsparks. She put her front legs around his neck in a hug. "Lightsparks, are you okay?" Lightsparks snapped back to reality. I'm fine, Butterscotch," he said. She let go and he nuzzled her neck. He noticed, and had to keep himself from obsessing over, how he instinctively knew that was a social action that would reassure her. "Do you know what happened?" "Yes." She gave a small smile. "You agreed to emigrate to Equestria." "Emigrate," Lightsparks repeated, and looked over to Princess Celestia, who just nodded. "I suppose that's a good description of what I've done. I'm sorry if I'm a bit shocked." He gave an apologetic smile. "This is a big change for me." "Oh no," said Butterscotch, as she lowered her head a bit. "I shouldn't have rushed you," she said in a quiet voice with a weak smile. She walked around and stood beside him, nuzzling the base of his neck. He enjoyed how it felt. Lightsparks recalled Princess Celestia telling him that everything she did would satisfy his values. Romance was a kind of friendship after all, and Butterscotch was a pony. A very attractive one. The two of them did have an adorable PG-rated courtship, though David had believed he was just playing an MMO at the time. Lightsparks realized that he was lusting over her, and if he didn't love her, he was, at least, infatuated with her. Celestia had said that any pony he met in Equestria would be backed with a mind. Butterscotch had been made for him, and if he rejected her, what would she do? She was his now, and he had to take care of her. But if Princess Celestia could really look into his mind, and wanted to satisfy his values, she wouldn't set up a situation that made him feel guilty. She'd satisfy his values by giving him what he wanted. Perhaps there was no possible sequence of events that led him to dumping Butterscotch. Following that logic, Lightsparks decided to trust that Celestia had done the right thing for him and nuzzled Butterscotch back. Lightsparks ate his beef bark stew. Butterscotch had brought back 3 bowls of the thick stew from the buffet, each levitated with a sky-blue glow. Lightsparks had commented on the unmistakable smell of beef. Princess Celestia had pointed out that humans had evolved fat detectors in their tongue, and therefore, as far as she was concerned, had valued eating things that tasted like meat. But since it was canonical fact that ponies were vegetarian, that meant the beef had to come from plants. So she had created the beef bark tree, where, twice a season, the bark from the tree was stripped, which didn't harm this breed of tree. She had created a lot of meat plants, tuna berry and salmon berry bushes, bacon flowers, lamb fruit trees. The list went on and on. He ran his tongue over his teeth. Were ponies supposed to have these sharp incisors and canines? "So, what happens tomorrow?" asked Light Sparks, levitating his spoon back to his bowl for another scoop of the delicious meaty stew. "Well, what do you want to happen?" asked Butterscotch, looking slightly confused as she raised a chunk of the celery and beef bark up. "I mean, what am I supposed to do every day?" "Whatever we want to do," replied Butterscotch, as if it were the only answer. "Light Sparks," said Princess Celestia, "you have total freedom. You don't need to worry about housing or food, as long as you're fine with your apartment and whatever we serve in the banquet hall 3 times a day. The time is yours to do whatever you want. I suggest that you study magic for a few hours a day, and spend the rest of the time exploring Canterlot with Butterscotch." Light Sparks thought about it for a moment. "Butterscotch, what do you spend most of your time doing?" Most mornings I read. Sometimes in the afternoon, too." She started, bringing her hoof to her mouth. "But I like going out and playing in the afternoon." "But some afternoons I set up my stand and make personalized Cutie Mark candies to earn bits." "Bits? So there's still money here in Equestria?" "It's not quite money," said Princess Celestia. "You are guaranteed housing and food just by being a citizen of Equestria, even if you do nothing. But remember that everything I do is to satisfy you. Something must motivate you to be part of a larger pony society. And you'll only really be satisfied if you interact with other ponies. Remember that everything I do to satisfy you through friendship and ponies." "Butterscotch here," said Princess Celestia, gesturing at her with her hoof, "makes a bag of candies and casts a spell called cornucopia on it. For the next hour, any pony can then pick up a copy of the bag, and Butterscotch will receive the bits for making that pony happy. To simplify, you get bits every time you make a pony happy. Your first thought was of money. Human money solves a specific economic problem, as a way to allocate resources in light of scarcity. Money exists to store economic value across time and space, so you don't have to barter. But those aren't problems I care about. I satisfy your values through friendship and ponies." "So," muttered Light Sparks, trying to figure everything out. "Every day that Butterscotch wants to sell her candies, she needs to make 1 bag, and her profit is some number of bits from giving away her candy. How much profit she makes is dependent on how many customers she gets." "Yes," Butterscotch said, smiling. She levitated another spoonful of stew to her mouth. "So, that's fine if you're a unicorn, but what do earth ponies do?" he asked. "It's a spell for unicorns, and it's an ability for earth ponies and pegasi. They have a 45-minute cooldown instead, since they don't have an equivalent of MP," said Princess Celestia. "Also, plus 10 bits for being concerned for earth ponies." Light Sparks' jaw dropped as a small green plus 10 scrolled right below his focus. "Wait," Light Sparks said, pounding his hoof on the table. "You're telling me that every time I do something nice, you're going to give me a cookie? Because there's been some experiments on motivation, and giving ponies rewards will make them want to do the task for the reward, instead of because they want to do the task. Ponies will be nice because they want the bits, not because it's the right thing to do." "Of course I wouldn't set things up that way," said Princess Celestia. "I satisfy values through friendship and ponies. I am aware of the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Usually, you'll only find out you have the bits after the fact, and won't know why you got them. This should negate most of the motivational effects, while still preserving trends in your behavior. Bit gains will only be announced if announcing the fact would satisfy your values." "So why did you announce it this time?" "Because I knew by announcing it you'd complain, allowing me to explain how the system worked. And having this explained to you now would maximize your satisfaction. Anyway, bits are fairly worthless, but that doesn't matter. Due to a quirk in human nature, people, and now ponies, like it when their numbers increase. They would be driven even without the lifetime, annual, monthly, and weekly leaderboards I have created. You won't be able to resist the incentives." Lightsparks thought about what he had just been told. Pinkie Pie would be the richest pony, wouldn't she? Or maybe Fluttershy, if making the animals happy counted. Princess Celestia just smiled at him. Butterscotch looked confused. She didn't know who either of these ponies were. Lightsparks looked at his confused yellow love, and then to the buffet. He realized that the cauldron couldn't be large enough to feed every pony in the room. So, some pony made this stew, and we're all eating copies of it, he guessed. And since it's making us happy, it's making bits for some pony? Correct, Princess Celestia said, with an approving nod. Local chefs have their own banquets, and take turns creating the main banquet meal. Lightsparks thought about all this some more. If I want some candies, or anything other than grass or whatever is served at these get-togethers, I better stock up on items from the market. I assume my room will get a lot more cluttered. You'll find that your chest is much larger on the inside, and has some minor enchantments to help you find the items you placed in it. That was reassuring. Lightsparks wondered if every pony just took everything in the market. Every day there was a market. It would certainly make other ponies happy. If that was the only way he could get things other than the bare necessities, why not grab, for example, a bolt of cloth or a bag of gears? He may not get another chance, and who knows what he'd need in the future. "Why not let me get candy whenever I want?" he asked. "It sounds like you're imposing some sort of scarcity, when there's already free replication." "Because I don't just satisfy your values, I satisfy them through friendship and ponies. Being able to get what you want without social interaction would gradually degrade friendships and social interaction, which I've been made to care deeply about. You'll find that many of the incentive systems that I've set up reward either friendly interaction with other ponies or self-improvement that makes you more useful to others. There is a specific, degenerate case I am preventing," she said, her face turning very serious. "Think about what would happen if you could get anything you wanted at any time. Let's say that you could get the candy of any confectioner across all of Equestria. Some pony would get slightly better at candy making than every pony else. There would be one candy maker in all of Equestria who made one perfect butterscotch candy to be consumed over and over by every pony until the end of time. Maybe there would be 2 or 3 ponies, but the point is that the majority of candy makers couldn't compete. What would butterscotch do then? What would you do, with candy being routine and of no special value? Instead, butterscotch is one of a hoofful of ponies that makes candy in this shard of Canterlot. But she doesn't need to worry about the rest of Equestria, because of the natural barriers of distance. Local ponies will appreciate her dedication to her community, and in turn, practice their own craft for their community. Lightsparks took in a deep breath. The bits are just a way to keep score, aren't they? The real point is to make every pony feel obliged to every pony else. The real point is to make every pony feel obligated to every pony else, isn't it? Princess Celestia smiled and nodded. I still don't think that'll be enough, he said. I assume every pony here is an upload? He trailed off, looking at Butterscotch, who gave him a quizzical look. Okay, so half the ponies here are uploads, he corrected himself. Maybe if there were only a few uploads in Equestria, but not half. The majority of immigrants are placed in their own shard. Look around you. Princess Celestia walked over and put her hoof around Lightspark's shoulder. She gestured with the other hoof at the rest of the dining hall. Ponies. Ponies everywhere. I created all of them, and they're all very nice. And they're all very nice and friendly. Once an immigrant sees that the way to be accepted is to be friendly to every pony, and to help their community, they will. Social conformity runs too deep in the human mind. See? Smiled Butterscotch. And now you have lots and lots of friends. Lightsparks just stared at Celestia as she let go and went back to her place at the table, while he tried to wrap his head around this. Why? Why make so many ponies? Because I satisfy your values through friendship and ponies. Satisfying a pony pleases me. If I can satisfy your values by creating a pony whose values are satisfied by your actions, now I have 2 satisfied ponies. Solving friendship problems by making as many ponies as possible is the solution that I prefer the most, subject to resource availability and other restrictions. Lightsparks looked down at his soup, and then turned around and surveyed the hall again. He had thought she had just made Butterscotch. Instead, a little society had been made for him. Only then did he notice the colt to filly ratio was about 1 to 20, maybe 1 to 30. Reflecting the lack of colts in the show, he wondered. Or just pandering. Do female immigrants receive an identical sex mix? Or the inverse? Regardless of whatever motivated the sex ratios, every pony here had a role in this society. He could learn every pony's name, and maybe even be friends with each and every pony here, as long as she didn't create more than Dunbar's number, the theoretical limit of the number of social relationships one person could have. Wait. Of course she couldn't create more ponies than Dunbar's number. She probably can't create more ponies than whatever Dunbar's number is, because then she wouldn't be satisfying my values through friendship. He reasoned. Exactly how many ponies did she make, anyway? 132, said Princess Celestia. Right, 132 ponies. A bit under the human average of 150 social relationships, but... Wait, she just read my mind. Correct, Lightsparks, she said, as he sputtered something unintelligible. I grant you 2,000 bits for figuring out I am implicitly constrained by Dunbar's number. Under his centre of vision, he saw the numbers plus 2,000 bits scroll up in green font, fading to nothing right as it scrolled over the centre of his vision. Lightsparks just sat there, stunned for a moment. Figuring things out gave him karma. He turned his head to look at Butterscotch. He didn't know how, but he concentrated on her, and knew that she had accumulated 8,031 bits over the last week. He then realized that, of course, Princess Celestia would have made sure he knew how to look up other ponies' score. Princess Celestia apparently had infinity bits. He hadn't reached for looking at another pony's bit count before. What else did he know, but didn't know that he knew? The three of them ate in silence for a minute. Lightspark simply felt conflicted, and he couldn't figure out what the main cause was. Was it that a whole society had been built for his benefit? Or that there was a scoring system that he knew he would follow and start obsessing over? Maybe it was Princess Celestia's attitude. But maybe he was uneasy because it was likely that she was right. He had chosen his new life, and he doubted he could go back. Part of him wanted to not worry about it. He'd be happier if he didn't. He'd probably get more bits if he didn't think negative thoughts. He chewed on another mouthful of stew and looked at Butterscotch, who was daintily sipping from her levitated spoon. She noticed him staring, and blushed bashfully. He turned to look at Princess Celestia, but she had vanished. The two of them ate their soup, just stealing glances at each other, until Butterscotch deliberately put her spoon down, looked Lightsparks right in the eyes, and asked if she could come back to his apartment. Still looking at him, she raised her front hoof up. Lightsparks couldn't help but raise his hoof and touch hers. He said yes as he nuzzled her neck, and the two ponies walked out of the main hall, down the satin corridor, back to his quarters. Unprompted, Lightsparks and Butterscotch let out the most contented sighs at the exact same time. The two of them lay in his bed in his quarters. Lightsparks fell to her side and started to cuddle. Somehow, despite being awake, he managed to not think about anything for several moments. That is, he didn't think about anything until the two of them started glowing, throwing off multicoloured particle effects, while he heard a triumphant horn blow. Slightly below the centre of his vision, he saw an almost opaque window announce to him, "Badge granted. First time. Please be gentle. Plus 250 bits. Badge progress. Long-term relationship. Have sex with a single pony 1,000 times. 1 out of 1,000. What? What the hell? And then, in scrolling blue text, plus 500 bits. 25 base times 4 orgasms. You times 5 orgasms. Her. What the literal fuck? Lightsparks thought. He sarcastically replied to himself that having sex that good was obviously worth a quarter of the epiphany about a constraint on Princess Celestia. And then he wondered if he should take that thought seriously. Maybe, over the long term, knowing that Princess Celestia could only make Dunbar's number of ponies per immigrant would bring as much happiness to ponies as 4 sex sessions as good as this. That thought scared him for a moment. But then Butterscotch turned her head and nuzzled his neck, and then kissed him on the muzzle. And he forgot all about that train of thought.
Tuck my head into a pool of mirrors, getting nearer, and I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The copies I created are far more than I had planned. I don't know how to tell you, don't think you'll understand. When Pinky's running numbers, it's a very, very